Hi, everybody. Welcome to another Chats with Audrey. I hope you're safe and well. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Dr. Stuart Lowe, who's Head of Biotechnology, Cell and Gene Therapy at TTP PLC. And Stuart and I actually met at BPI recently, and we were just talking about biotechnology and some of the trends. And so we thought, what a great opportunity it would be to catch up, actually, and do a Chats with Audrey, talking about the trends and the future of biotechnology. Stuart kindly gave up some time to actually do that. So Stuart, first of all, it's lovely to see you. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad, thank you. Not too bad. It's Friday afternoon, but a bit of a rainy and cloudy one today.
Yeah, well, people can check the weather out behind you as we talk, so that'll be good. All right, well, look, before we start talking about your views on the future of biotechnology, I think it'd be useful for viewers to one to get an overview of who TTP are, and also, more importantly, know what your role is and your background is, so that we can understand why you're talking about these particular topics. So, Stuart, first of all, who are TTP? What do you do? And what's your role in your background?
Okay, yeah. Well, you'll see we're sitting here in rural Cambridgeshire. TTP's been based out just outside Cambridge for about 35 years. And what we do is we actually very passionate about the role of hardware in pushing therapies towards the clinic. That's part of the role of my team at TTP. But in general, TTP are technology enthusiasts. There's about 300 of us, all with a scientific and engineering background, trying to deploy technology in some of the most cutting edge fields. So anywhere from satellite communications, driverless cars, drug delivery, diagnostics, to bioprocessing and cell and gene. So what does that actually mean in practice? So we help our clients to develop custom scalable hardware that allows them to manufacture the latest cell and gene therapies while preserving some of those kind of pieces of magic that allow their therapies to really shine. And so where did I come into all of this? So I joined TTP about 9 years ago. I came out of a postdoc where I was working on materials for 3D cell culture. And prior to that, I was working on biosensors. I'm a physicist by background, so I'm one of the scientists here. And so I actually spent the first few years at TTP working on diagnostics. At that point, there was a trend to move outside of the central laboratory into point of care diagnostics.
Right, sure, yeah.
Trying to scale things down, do things faster, and really make things more usable in a doctor's office. So it's a regulated industry, just like medicines manufacture. And so that sort of systems engineering, systems design philosophy led me to running some projects in bioprocessing and sensors for bioprocessing. That's taken me into the cell and gene therapy world, which I'm really pleased to be in because it's a really exciting field with so much going on. And yeah, that's kind of what I'm keen to talk about.
Fantastic. Well, look, I know I should have mentioned actually, we also met at Advanced Therapies
Yeah, did yeah.
in Europe, in Israel as well. So I know you go to a lot of events as well. Obviously, because of your role, you have to have your finger on the pulse in terms of the trends going on in the industry. So, from your perspective, I mean, if you look at biotechnology, there's been a lot of coverage on it over the last few years. What do you think are some of the most exciting developments that we can expect to see in the near future within the biotechnology space?
But within my particular realm of biotechnology, I'll concentrate on cell and gene here because I think there's so much going on that you can sort of balloon that even a little bit. But some of the trends actually are common to other areas of biotech as well. So I think it's hard to have a crystal ball, but we've done some really great work on extending human life as a society. We're very good at extending human life now, but not necessarily extending the quality of life. And so what I think you'll see is greater focus on chronic disease rather than just acute disease. So we've seen cell therapies being able to cure cancer, but wouldn't it be great to also cure things like diabetes, where you've got a really high burden of care? And there are companies out there doing that, like Vertex Pharmaceuticals, for example. So if we're going to do that, though, we need to solve some of these bottlenecks within cell therapy manufacture.
Right.
That's what I'm really excited to see, because if we're going to see these first mass market, these first chronic disease cures, we're really going to have to invest, or as a community, we're going to have to invest in partnerships to bring down those costs.
Sure.
And actually, you're probably going to see a lot more allogeneic therapies come to the market. So allogeneic would be where you receive cells from a donor.
Yep.
You might be able to create therapies that you'd be able to take off the shelf, rather than have this cumbersome vein-to-vein process from the autologous therapies. And indeed, we're seeing partnerships there. So Bayer and Cytiva have been working together to industrialize their allogeneic therapy process.
So you should mention that I just shared their story from Jen this afternoon
Oh
about
yeah,
that, actually. So that's a funny link that you should mention it, because I literally just shared that story this afternoon.
I saw their talk at BPI. It was one from Bayer and one from Cytiva, telling the story of kind of how they came together and how they approached it. It was fascinating. Kind of a process development story.
Right. Okay. That's interesting. What about, though? I mean, you're talking about that, but from a drug delivery point of view, what do you think some of the trends could be going forward as well?
Yeah. So when you're thinking about being able to deliver some of these cell therapies, obviously you're going to have to do some of the final steps of the formulation close to the patient.
Yep.
You don't have time to ship the product from a central manufacturing facility. And in fact, you really do have to kind of arrange the logistics with the patient to make sure that they're present at the time that the
Right.
infusion is going to happen. So it makes sense to maybe do those kind of final formulation steps on site or near patient. But in terms of some of the different steps in the processing, maybe you might have a cryopreservation facility that just does cryopreservation. You might have a cell selection facility that just does the cell separation, and you end up with these economies of scale, because each part of the process then becomes very specialized. And so all these components will then come together at the right point, at the point of need in the hospital. So I think there's a sort of like a decentralized model, but kind of semi-centralized, so that you're not, because no hospital is going to be able to do all of the manufacturing steps.
Sure.
And trying to centralize everything makes it into a logistical nightmare. So we're going to have to find some sort of middle ground if we're going to deliver these therapies.
Right. Now, you mentioned obviously there's a lot of promise for biotechnology gene therapy in terms of treating previously untreatable diseases. But what do you think is the potential impact of gene therapies on healthcare in terms of some of the other challenges they present?
Yeah, so I mean, you see a lot of gene therapies in the headlines. So we had Zolgensma being approved a few years ago for spinal muscular atrophy. It hit the headlines because it's amongst one of the most expensive therapies ever created, ever put on the market. So there's a health economics piece there, and how do you persuade payers that the therapies are worth it, and they actually do deliver the quality of life improvements that are required. But actually, what I think the problems are going to be, they are going to be soluble. Okay, so with biologics, if you look at antibodies and monoclonal antibodies in the past, they were incredibly expensive to begin with, but we became better as an industry in manufacturing those and optimizing manufacturing processes. So I think we will see a similar trend with the costs, that as we become more familiar with these products, then we will be able to bring the costs down. I mean, you can, for specifically for gene therapies or kind of vector mediated, there's a lot of parallels actually that you can draw between the biologics production, antibody production, and production of AAVs, for example. The characterization is a little bit more tricky than what you have to do for biologics. There's slightly more components to them. There's this full versus empty versus partially full capsid issue that you have to contend with. So I think if we're looking for innovations, some way to improve the characterization there would be a benefit. And then other things which I've spoken to people about recently is actually targeting.
Right.
So at the moment you have to deliver gene therapy systematically. So you put them into the bloodstream and then you hope that they find their target. Well, if we can be a bit more targeted with how we generate the AAV, so maybe there'd be some kind of targeting moiety or some formulation that allows you to put some sort of binder onto the capsid, then you might not need quite as high a dose in order to have the intended effect, because you've got this targeting and this kind of natural concentration of the therapy. So I think there's a few innovations which will come on to bring down the cost actually of these gene therapies.
Right. Well, that leads on quite nicely, because have you got any examples or initiatives, projects that you guys are working on at the moment to sort of illustrate the direction that biotechnology is going?
Yeah, so I think so. TTP often works on areas where we are trying to reduce the cost of therapies or reduce the time taken to make therapies, or help people with their scaling challenges. And this is quite an old example now, which I'll start with. But it was work that we did with Amgen when they were doing EPO, erythropoietin. So they had got some really good clinical data on the therapy, and they were making it in roller bottles, but they had no way to scale this to the demand that they thought they needed. And they came to us asking, could we scale up the production? We had a look at it and thought about their business case, and where they needed to be and when they needed to launch to hit the demand. And we actually said, no, you don't want to scale up. You're going to need to. The only option available to you now is to scale out. And so we built a roller bottle line here on site at TTP. Took up half of a building, where we had many thousands of roller bottles all working in parallel to produce the product. We shipped it over to California, this whole manufacturing system, and they were up and running months, probably, maybe even years earlier than they would have done if they kind of gone down that track of trying to scale up the process. They just didn't have time. And so the impact of TTP's work there was to really save them a lot of time and money in doing a development they didn't really need to do at that point.
It's also giving a different point of view, isn't it? Different eyes looking at it from a different angle. So you sort of go down a pathway and your mind is set on that, and you need someone from the outside to look at it and give you a different perspective.
Yeah, and we do have a different perspective, because obviously a lot of the companies that we work for are single product focus. Their sole focus is to get this product on the market as soon as they can, because they want to treat patients, they want to save they want to save patients, and why should we hold back this therapy any longer than it needs to be? But that does mean that you kind of get quite narrow in your thinking. Whereas if you think of a company like TTP, we run hundreds of projects every year, and we are seeing slightly different facets from each of our clients, and we've seen how some approaches work and how well they work, and some approaches don't work, and we can use that sort of vantage point to benefit our clients in the market as well. So one of the things that we noticed in the market was that there was going to be a need for much faster cell sorting. in some of these cell therapies. So can you sort an entire apheresis sample within a matter of hours? At the moment, you can't do that using conventional VACs. So we thought, wouldn't it be useful if TTP could offer something to the market that we developed ourselves? And we actually spun out a company called Cellular Highways to be able to do that. And their main innovation is to have a microfluidic based cell sorter. So it's not sorting in air. So A, it's fully closed, so it can go into GMP. B, it's scalable, so you can parallelize it. 1 or 16 channels. One can go to 16 channels, and you can get a much higher throughput there. So you can actually do this apheresis sample within that couple of hour window. So that's just another example of kind of where we spotted a kind of gap or a need, and say actually we can use technology, we can use hardware to actually help people progress their therapies. It doesn't, the ingenuity doesn't always just have to be on the biology side. There's a lot of innovation there, but actually hardware innovation can be just as impactful as well.
So Stuart, one of the things that does come up though when you start talking about new therapy is questions around ethics and regulatory issues and how they get impacted with these new therapies that people are developing. So from your perspective, again, what do you think are some of the most pressing ethical concerns people have, and how should we address them going forward?
Yeah, well, we saw during the COVID pandemic and the subsequent vaccination drive that actually there is some fear amongst the general public about things that alter genetic makeup, or at least the perception of, because of course with COVID vaccination it was a transient gene expression rather than a permanent genetic change. But of course with other kind of gene editing, maybe that is really kind of having a permanent change. So okay, so the people are kind of uncertain about gene therapies, and how they might be affecting kind of their biological makeup. Now with regulations, there is already a lot of regulation about, say, gene editing on embryos or gene editing on germ cells. So anything that actually could create kind of generational damage. So we should be reassured about that. But what I kind of see in the far future, and this is perhaps a little bit sci-fi, but often you see when a therapy comes established, it then becomes mainstream, and you see kind of like recreational drug use, right? So what about recreational gene therapy use? How is that going to be regulated in the future? Could you conceive of people doing cosmetics based on gene therapy, cosmetic use, or what about cognitive enhancement use? And the ethics around that is mainly around a kind of a haves and a have-nots.
Sure.
But there's going to be a certain set of people who can afford to do these enhancements, and there'll just be a certain set of people who won't be able to, and that kind of creates a bit of a two-class system. So the availability and regulation of these will be important. And I'm not just saying that because it's kind of sci-fi, but if you think about some of these really expensive gene therapies on the market, there already is a bit of a have and a have not. Why should a treatment for SMA only be really available to people in US and Europe and not to somebody in Africa? The person's need might be just as strong, but it's just that they don't have the healthcare system that can support it. So I think there is so a lot of the ethics comes around the costs at the moment.
Well, that's a very good point, and also leads very nicely to my next question, which was all about the fact that obviously you look at a lot of the promising therapies out there, and they're around treating genetic and rare diseases. But how do you scale them up so they are actually more accessible, like you were saying a bit earlier, to a much broader population? Because even as a layperson, I go to a lot of these conferences and I hear this wonderful science that's being talked, and all these wonderful things, but they're obviously always for these very, very rare diseases. Or you talk about something and it's costing literally millions to have one dose, and you think, well, only one person or one or two people are going to be
Yeah,
lucky
yeah.
enough to have that. And you look at it and you think, well, is it going to be a two-tier health system, even in Western countries, where a small minority of people can get treatment for everything whenever they're ill and no one else can? So how can we scale these therapies up to make them more accessible to a broader population?
So I can't claim to have all the answers.
Well, no, you'd be a multi-multi billionaire. You wouldn't be talking to me right now if you did. I can see that.
I mean, and it's actually, there's a lot of different aspects to this. So there's a lot of different issues that need to be solved before we actually have full mass market cures.
Sure.
I mean, a lot. So I've just there's things around capital. So access to capital, because the manufacturing is expensive and it is difficult to find the space to make these therapies. The people actually involved in the therapy manufacture. So there's training. The supply chains for these therapies are incredibly complex, because if you think about a small molecule like aspirin, it's just a few chemicals. Whereas with a cell therapy, or a kind of a genetically engineered cell therapy, you've got lots of biological starting material, even at the front end, which is very complex to produce, that even before you start making the medicine itself. So there's kind of complex supply chains which put the costs up. But I think those three aspects can be addressed to some extent with automation. So if you think about having a factory where you don't have as many people having to move cells from one process to another, making sterile welds, for example. They don't need to be continually monitoring the machine. So automation, true end-to-end automation, would not only reduce the number of people needed to make these therapies, but also could be more space intensive as well, not have to build such big factories. And actually, then you could start to log the supply chain in a much more kind of automated fashion as well, a little bit more like your Amazon or your Ocado would do. So yeah, those three are kind of automation based, and then you've got a couple of other things which are to do with control of your source material and control of your process. And I think probably new sensors and new ways of doing QC. And better ways of documenting the process are probably what's needed there. So there's lots of people working on digitization. There's lots of people working on sensors, and there's lots of people working on QC of the future. And I think those will. So there's lots of elements that need to come together. But I think the future is bright, because that's what people are working on. And that's many of the projects that we work on are working on aspects of those bottlenecks in the process.
All right. Well, that's fantastic. Now, we've covered quite a lot in this session. And I know when you and I are talking, there's so much you could talk about, literally, about what's going on here. But you guys have actually started your own podcast to actually talk more about these topics, haven't you?
That's right. Yeah. So we launched the TTP Invent Life Science podcast. We actually midway through season 2. And in this podcast, we want to talk about some of the issues faced by practitioners in the life sciences. So people who are actually trying to commercialize some of the cutting edge technology. So every week we get on 2 or 3 guests, and we find out what they're doing. It could be in collaborating within cell therapy, to form those partnerships that are gonna help move the industry forward. It might be people who are talking about more inclusivity in clinical trials, and how do we actually, at that end of the spectrum, try to make sure that more people get access to therapies. So we've got episodes on those, but really the audience is for people who they're already involved in the biotech industry, but they're perhaps kind of working in adjacent fields, and they haven't had time to do a deep dive on some of these kind of thornier issues in adjacent areas. So it's to kind of help people broaden their knowledge. Hopefully they're interesting and fun to listen to as well.
Great. Well, look, what we'll do then is we'll actually put the link to the series season 1 so they can see the earlier episodes and also the latest episode that you've got above this video, so
Oh,
they can
fantastic.
listen to that, and obviously they can subscribe hopefully once they've listened to it and they love it, Stuart. So that's fantastic. Now obviously if people want to know more about TTP, where can they get more information?
So if you come to the website ttp.com, you'll find a lot of examples of what we do, some case studies, the industries we work in as well, because we're not just in life sciences, but we're also in health
Sure.
tech and deep tech as well.
Fantastic. Well, that's brilliant. Well, look, I have no doubt we'll bump into you at a future event in the not too
Definitely.
distant future. There's a lot of events still going on for the rest of this year, and obviously there's going to be lots in 2024. So, Stuart, genuinely, it's been a really interesting conversation. I've got lots of other questions I could ask you, but we could be here all day. And it's a Friday afternoon, so I'd rather let you go home and have a break and enjoy your
Have a
weekend.
relaxing weekend.
Exactly, Stuart. So, there you go, viewers. I hope you found that interesting. We covered quite a lot of areas there. But if you agree with Stuart or disagree with Stuart, we'd love to hear from you. Feel free to put your comments below the video, or you can message Stuart directly on LinkedIn. He's on LinkedIn. And go to the TTP website. And actually, as Stuart quite rightly said, he's got the podcast. Make sure you click on the links above, check out the podcast for some of the earlier episodes he's got in the latest episode, and click that link and subscribe. So, Stuart, it's lovely to see you. Thank you very much for taking time out to talk to me. It's been a really interesting conversation. And viewers, thank you for watching. Until next time, as always, stay well and stay safe. Bye-bye.